Hello and welcome. This was all of us when Zach Williams kicked his third to put Carlton up 5 goals late in the fourth quarter. Carlton have finally beaten an Adelaide-based team at the Adelaide Oval, ending an 11-year-long hoodoo. And the performance was headlined by the way Carlton ended as opposed to how they began. 8 final quarter goals after 8 goals in 3 quarters. We've done plenty of reviews that analyze specific quarters, but none as dominant as this. Today, we're going to suss out how this came to be. Make sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to remain tuned for the analysis video next week. And if you think the content is that worth it, you can also become a channel member to support me financially. Enjoy. Carlton's final quarter decimation of the power arose off the back of stoppage. 7 of the 8 goals kicked by the Blues came from this source in the final quarter. But interestingly, Port Adelaide led 7-3 in centre clearances. The few centre clearances Carlton won were quite damaging and were a response to what David King said at halftime.
I think the Carlton midfield need a lift. When De Koning's in there, they've got to cash in.
Port Adelaide have experienced a significant drop-off in points against in recent weeks, and this is closely linked with a leakage of points from turnover. This has been due to, as David King alluded to, an inability to experience Aaliyah's capable intercepting ability, with an elevation in one-on-one contests and an elevation in losses in these one-on-ones. This is something that was exploited by the Blues out of the centre bounces with that 6-6-6 rule. As we've said, Port were winning centre clearances, but Carlton's halfbacks off the back of the square were preempting where the ball was headed and peeled off to aggressively attack the other way. Sam Walsh was one who shed light on this post-game.
What was the message from Michael Voss and the midfield coach to get that response? Where was the challenge specifically?
Yeah, I thought some of our defensive efforts to come forward and take away that real power run through the middle was highlighted at half-time.
The first play out of the centre, the power get it partially cleared, but Adam Saad pelts the ball forward, and it comes down to being first to the footy and being slick with the footy. That was a stark contrast to some sequences in the third when Carlton were inaccurate, and was the source for Cripps to kick goals such as these. A prime example of Port's vulnerability with the one-on-ones. The centre clearance was Port Adelaide's only real form of leverage for field position in the final quarter. Most of the scores they generated arose from turnover, which they kicked 2 goals from. But interestingly, the power for the 11 inside 50s they only had 15 possessions arise from these inside 50s when you combine the numbers for both teams. What does this mean? Quick stints in the 50. Either Port Adelaide were kicking goals because the ball had gotten over the back of Carlton's high press, or they were being shunted wider, courtesy of a strong Blues defensive mechanism. This is a neat example where the high press doesn't secure the footy. Burne-Jones capitalises on a ball-watching Cripps, and with the handball game on the open side, the power can carry it far enough ahead to have numbers spill out back. Port need 2 kicks to kick a goal. The short pass and the actual shot at goal. If we want to talk about Carlton sending Port wide, here's a good example where the power apply the switch after an interception. They have decent positioning with footy in hand in the middle, but send themselves lower on the ledger with a kick wider. It's allowed Mackay to adopt a deeper position, Walsh and Carroll among others to clog the centralised areas. It's also allowed Boyd to move into the wider space where the ball is destined to head. Look, we're probably stuffed if the kick was sat up for the mismatch that's been created, but Marshall is more of a leading presence, not an aerial threat. So Boyd playing in front, looking over his shoulder and blocking the Marshall run is smart. It's made Marshall's running room extremely limited, and you have to pin the eye of a needle to execute this kick. Then from here, throw-ins would happen, and this is where Carlton's stoppage number comes in. Carlton won around the ground stoppages 11-2 in the final quarter, and so these throw-ins within 1 to 2 possessions went straight back out on most occasions, feeding into the stoppage game for Carlton downfield. Michael Voss discussed where that improvement arose.
They were just breaking far too easily from that part and getting too many metres off that. So that was a challenge. There was a couple of little tidy-ups, minor structure, but more about method. The boys were really responsive to that.
And I'm definitely echoing that method change. Their backline holding up, the team applying pressure and being first in meant The minute they could send Cincotta on the ball, drag those flankers up towards the stoppage, and players on the outside were closer like Akers, Carlton's ascendancy rose, and they were afforded entry after entry and overwhelmingly positive field position. The results were damaging and was reiterated pre-game with these comments.
But against the top 8 sides, they haven't been as good. Sometimes they get monstered around the ball, the contested possessions, also down back with the ground balls as well.
And Ken Hinkley put it perfectly when he said post-game,
You know, we exposed them to too much clean ball, simple ball, and they were first to react, and we were second to react in the last quarter behind the ball.
For Carlton's second goal of the fourth, Port Adelaide was second to react behind the ball, but not to a ball in dispute in this case. Patrick Cripps just kicked a goal on your team. From this point onwards, there is zero Port Adelaide accountability for Cripps, quite unforgivable. This is from a few seconds prior to the ball up, and 11 seconds elapse with him alone, until he obtains possession and Carlton's cleanliness assists this play in feeding Cripps. This territory dominance gets to the point where players like Mitch McGovern were given license to push ahead as Port's numbers rolled back, which as we know resulted in a goal. McGovern starts on Burn-Jones. It literally is down to the power being slightly off, and Delir's inability to intercept given he's preoccupied with Kennedy. Ball drops, Hollands shoves Farrell to the weaker side. Burn-Jones tries to stop the immediate threat. As a result, McGovern is now open. Hollands, as he dishes it off, barricades himself between Gov and Burn-Jones unintentionally, and that space on the open side works out for us perfectly. The kick beforehand by Harry Mackay really helps feed into this overload on the open side. Earlier in the contest, you see something very similar with the way in which Brodie Kemp was able to convert his major. But let's not forget, some stats at quarter time indicate that in the non-deconing minutes, Carlton were getting smashed in clearance. And this is where you notice the pit net void. But I think it was particularly exciting to see the ruck minutes in the fourth quarter lack the same vulnerability from these second ruck options, especially Harry, and that could very much be part of the reason Carlton's stoppage clearance dominance was also visible. Carlton had a number of accumulators in the fourth quarter from the midfield heading forward, superseding the best efforts of those in a power jumper. These guys played quality amounts of time on ground, contributed to the damage with their entries inside 50, and this was also reflected in the build-up as well. Carlton's surge mentality and midfield dominance could be highlighted in the amount of meters these players gained in the fourth quarter. I think this quote by Michael Voss pre-game sums up what they wanted to do well, which is what they ultimately executed in the fourth quarter and converted to after a different scoring profile in the first 3 quarters.
We scored really well out of our back half last week, but I don't think that's really something we want to continue to count on. Some of that's around our territory in the game from some clearance, but also our urgency to be able to defend a little harder when we need to so we can stop the team going end to end.
I think this is one such example where what we've discussed really shines through. Port Adelaide in the fourth quarter, as we've said, could not win stoppage clearance. Centre clearance, they win it, but Carlton's half-back line allows the rebound the other way, negating that tiny bit of power ascendancy in the fourth. Then, the pressure application is sky high by Cincotta, who forces the ball up, and then we can cook from this position, given the advantage we had in these scenarios. Whilst Carlton concede a free kick, it is the Cincotta tackle which gave the back six a bit of time, bit of leverage to set up a kick behind the ball, and the rest of the Carlton personnel to do less work to set up themselves upon conceding the free. The Powers space permits wide, but down the line, it's a comfortable 3-on-3 for the Blues, and equally it allows players on the weak side to peel off, given their opponent isn't reachable from this distance, in this case McGovern. I do want to pay a bit of respect to the backline in the earlier portion of the game. Paddy Cripps consistently talked about the defenders post-game in reference to the high line that they were setting on the field.
I thought the boys, our backline, the ability to come forward and be assertive actually kept us in the game, I thought, in the first 3 quarters.
You had your sweepers like Nick Newman around the back of contest, Adamsard with driving runs forward, and then admirable performers like Jacob Wiedering and and Brodie Kemp providing resounding spoils when called upon. Earlier in the game, the numbers were flipped. Port were winning from stoppage clearances, and so Carlton needed to withstand those Port Adelaide attacks continuously, which they did well, even with their backs to the wall. For example, this quality effort by Mitch McGovern after Port Adelaide's crispy stoppage clearance. And it was also with that aggressive defending which kept Carlton's back 50 well protected, with certain exceptions that allowed Carlton to keep the scoreboard ticking over as they locked it in their forward half. That's ultimately why Carlton's points from turnover and points from defensive half have lifted since Saad and McGovern have returned, as per this article. And that's also why, despite getting smoked in clearance, which they were so dependent on in the fourth, never trailed at any change of ends. McGovern's the peel-off defender, Saad is the run, but also the reliability element when it comes to that high press, whether he's sitting on the last line or in amongst it. You'll see one example here with Jacob Wietering pressing up to force Zach Butters into basically getting into Lockie Jones's way, meaning he slows down and actually nudged into Williams as he sprints at him, with the loopy handball creating a knock-on and Horne-Francis being nailed in the tackle by Saad. With the way Butters was running and shaping up, if he had more time and space, a kick out here is potentially on. And with that is a lot of space to operate on the camera and to the right of screen. Overall, Carlton did well to respond in the second half, after a first half where Port Adelaide should have had more to show for their efforts, considering a 1-goal 6 behind second quarter. The profile completely flipped to optimize Carlton's game, where they could dominate ground position for longer and then be well complemented by that high press to keep Port Adelaide segregated from their forward 50 for as long as possible. Consequently, Carlton steered clear of Port Adelaide with a clinical showing in front of goal, yet again providing a glimpse of the team's ceiling when they are incredibly opportunistic and hyper efficient at the attacking end. This week I've been a little bit more general with my analysis to try to address everything efficiently. So are there any plays that bob up in your mind which were incredibly profound? What were your thoughts after this last quarter? What did you think entering the fourth quarter? I definitely was feeling uneasy, but crazy how a quarter of footy can turn your mood on its head. If you've got any feedback for me, make sure to let me know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. I'll chat to you next week for another Carlton analysis, but until then, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.